Going live. All right. Okay, whoops. I'll pull that in closer when we get started. So welcome everyone to the Publishing Triangles event with Judy Grahn, Donna Minkowitz, J.P. Howard, Carol Rosenfeld. Happy to have this as an event to kick off this crazy day of back-to-back readings. And thanks so much for coming out. So my name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder, along with my partner, Donna Jochum, of the Bureau of General Services. Thank you. That's lovely to hear. We have regular bookstore hours Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. We often stay open later when we have events, which is often. Yes, and I'm still standing somehow. If you'd like to be on our email list, you can sign up for that at the back of the room, or for those of you watching online at bgsqd.com. That's for Bureau of General Services Queer Division. I'm going to pass the mic to Carol in a second, but I wanted to read a land acknowledgement and a call for a ceasefire in Gaza. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. We also want to recognize that today, April 20th, is the 197th day of Israel's genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people, funded by our tax dollars and enabled by our government's unwavering support. We hope that you will join us in calling for an immediate permanent ceasefire, an end to the siege, and an end to the occupation in order to stop the collective punishment of Palestinians and to ensure the swift delivery of desperately needed food, water, medicine, fuel, and humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. And now it is my pleasure to hand the mic over to Carol Rosenfeld of the Publishing Triangle. Please give Carol and all our guests a warm welcome.
I just want to briefly introduce our guests, because I know we all want to get talking, but to my immediate left is Donna Minkowitz. Donna got her start as the main writer on queer politics and culture at the Village Voice in the late 80s to the mid 90s. She went on to write a Lammy-winning memoir, Ferocious Romance, about covering the Christian right undercover, and a Lammy and a Judy Grahn Award finalist fantasy memoir, Growing Up Golem. Her debut novel, Donnaville, is coming out from Indolent Books in the fall. Judy Grahn should need no introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway. Judy Grahn is an internationally known poet, author, and cultural theorist. Eruptions of the Anna is her 17th published book. An early gay activist who walked the first picket of the White House for gay rights in 1965, she later co-founded Gay Women's Liberation and the Women's Press Collective. Her subjects range from LGBT history and mythology to feminist critiques of current crises, new origin theories of inclusion, what makes us human, taking anti-racism personally, and stories of how to engage with creature minds and spirits. She writes about and teaches her own poetry and also that of Sumerian poets interacting with goddess Iana. And if you have her, Amy Howard, our lady over there, is a poet, educator, literary activist, curator and community builder. JP is the inaugural 2024 Maine Writers Studio Writers Retreat resident and was a recent Brooklyn College Toe Mentor in Residence. Her debut poetry collection, Say Mirror, the Operating System, was a Lambda Literary finalist. She is also the author of Bury Your Love Poems Here, Belladonna, Praise the Complicated Herstory, Legacy, Healing, and Revolutionary Poems, Harlequin Creature, and co-editor of Sinister Wisdom Journal, Black Lesbians, We Are the Revolution.
Yeah.
JP was a featured author in Lambda Literary's LGBTQ Writers in Schools program and is featured in the Lesbian Poet Trading Card series from Headmistress Press. She has received fellowships and/or grants from Cave Canem, Donna, Lambda Literary Foundation, and Brooklyn Arts Council. She curates Women Writers in Bloom Poetry Salon. Her poetry is widely anthologized, and her poetry and essays have been featured in the New York Times, the Slowdown podcast, the Academy of American Poets, Apogee Journal, the Feminist Wire, Split This Rock, and Muzzle Magazine. She is the general poetry editor for Women's Studies Quarterly and editor at large of Mom Egg Review, VOX Online. So we're going to discuss a couple things, and I had a question that I posed last night to JP and Donna, and they both liked it. So Judy doesn't know this is coming, but I'm surprised. So what I was wondering is, do we experience great change as we age as writers, or are we, in Gertrude Stein's words, always the same age inside? So I know Donna wanted to respond to that.
Did you?
I'm gonna turn 60 in a few weeks, so thank you. Thinking a lot about age. I feel like I've always, in my work, I'm always basically the same, but the forms my work has taken have been incredibly different. I wanted to talk about myth some in this panel because I love how Judy's work uses myth, especially any fans of her books about Inanna out there. Yes, yes. And myth has always activated me very much too. And even when I was a journalist, I was a journalist at the Village Voice, where you're allowed to be funky, you're allowed to have a first person voice, not pretend to be objective. But in my understanding, I use myth to structure my stories. Even though, unfortunately, even at the Village Voice, you can't say, well, I'm writing about what the mayor is doing, and here's how it relates to Inanna. But anyway, so then I wrote 2 memoirs, one of which was, in my mind, structured about myth, even though it was about covering the Christian right. And the other one was formally structured about myth because it was my life, but it was written as though my mother had created me as her own personal golem. And then my forthcoming book, which is a novel, but sort of a memoir, uses the Divine Mother, who exists both inside me and outside me. And in the book, I want some stuff from her that I'm not getting. And the book is about trying to get that stuff. Thank you very much. And I'll pass it to Judy.
So your question is about how old are we at any given moment? And I'll say, with you that working on the work, I think that I'm somewhere between 4 and 8. Become, childlike and don't care about executive functions and things like that. But in getting older, the prize of getting older is that you get to look back and see what horrible effects your work has had, or what what worked, what was marvelous, what stayed around, and what needs revision. And that, so I've been really fortunate to have people say, let's revise and let's let you revise what went before to keep up with the times. And, you know, that's spectacular for me, because then everything just gets deeper. And also in the mythologies, you yourself become a mythology after a while. You know, it's all the characters that you have been in your life and how you put everything together. And so your ideas become mythological in a certain, and I mean that in the way of depth, that there's a depth that can happen. So the play that I'm working on right now, or the book length, whatever it is, you know, I can see almost every aspect of the work that I've done going into this, and being smarter about it, and being, you know, more lyrical than I've ever allowed myself to be. And it's very, very sweet. It's quite endearing to function like that.
Nice. Thank you. That's a great question, Carol. So I said when you first asked it. Sometimes I think I'm, my young, when I was at Barnard, first coming out, first discovering the words of, Judy Grahn and Pat Barker. I'm that person. But recently, I think I've really thought about, sort of aging. I've lost a few friends who were very dear to me, and we were all very similar ages, within a year or two. So I think that I bring that now, right? I bring that experience, that life experience to my writing, and I'm grateful for it. I mean, sometimes it makes me a little sad, especially having had some very significant losses recently. But also being able to kind of look back to sort of celebrate those people who are now my ancestors. There are a lot of ancestor poets that I've lost in the last number of years. Monica Hand, these are all Black lesbian poets I'm thinking about. So Monica Hand, Venus Thrash, Camilla Ishamoon. And so these are my contemporaries, right? So when you have that, you want to make sure that your writing also honors them, right? That we continue to keep their legacy going. So in that sense, I'm older, right? In that sense, I'm acknowledging my age. I'm acknowledging that loss, but also celebrating those lives and trying to make sure in my work that I honor them. So I think that that's how it's affected my, my aging. Yes.
Okay, so I think we also wanted to talk about, one of the things that we're here to talk about is how your work has been affected by Judy's writing. So do you want to take that, Donna?
Sure. Well, thinking about this workshop, I thought about myself around age 15, and I have an older sister who's also a lesbian. And she brought home Edward the Dyke. And I was not really out then. My sister Tina was only slightly out. She was bringing home books like that, but not saying anything about it. And in, I'm reading, and what I loved best about Edward the Dyke, I think this is Judy's first book of poems, am I right?
Psychoanalysis of Edward the Dyke.
Psychoanalysis of Edward the Dyke. So Edward is going to a shrink, and the shrink's trying to make Edward be straight. And Edward says all these lyrical, beautiful, nonsensical, sexy lines about what homosexuality means to her. And I'm just going to quote one real quick, and then we can go on to JP. But I love these lines so much, and it is right here. Yes, it is. Oh, all right. I'm just going to remember. Cinnamon toast, blueberry, higher wages. Imagine many more beautiful, more lyrical things. And then my sister brought home the issue of the American Poetry Review, that had Judy's amazing long poem, A Woman is Talking to Death. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a great poem. It's like, this lesbian poet is in the American Poetry Review. They put her in there. They had to because she's that good. And I remember there was this section about in the military, these amphibious tanks, and the amphibious tanks aren't built well, and the army keep driving them one after another into the sea, and they keep sinking. And I was a young anti-militarist dyke, and I'm reading this, and then the last line of that section was the general their lover. And I love that, the cold authority of that poem. And then as an adult and a writer, I've been most affected by Judy's book, The Queen of Swords, which is one of her books about the Sumerian goddess Inanna. And just really quick, if you've never read this book, read it. She takes this Sumerian myth about the Queen of Heaven, Inanna, who has everything in the upstairs realm, our realm. She has power, she has money. In Judy's version, she's married to a man. And she goes down to the underworld where she's stripped of everything. She's stripped of her jewels, of her clothes, of her special badges and her powers. And eventually she's stripped of her flesh and she's put on a meat hook for her flesh to rot. And it's about confronting the stuff, confronting, among other things, the stuff inside, including the bad stuff, and coming out of it, because she does come out of the underworld with the help of some non-binary beings and gods. And it's a beautiful book, and I have gotten so much of it in my work. My last book, Growing Up Golem, I thought of in many ways as an Inanna journey, going to the underworld and coming back up. And my forthcoming book, Donnaville, is a lot that as well. It's a lot about going to the most unpleasant, scariest places in the South and figuring out what to do with them. At least that's how I took it. Sorry.
Thank you so much for that. I would say I'm thinking about The Highest Apple and sort of discovering early, and I think it was probably in college that I initially read the original version, and discovering this connection with Sappho. Sappho sort of is this original lesbian poet. And this is when I sort of started to identify as a poet. So I love sort of having this connection, thinking about this power that goes back so long, and to kind of learn more about that, through Judy's writing. And also in that book, I think there was learning that poetry can be political, that poetry can be something that's sort of activist oriented, and learning about, Adrienne Rich and Pat Parker. And also I think that what I discovered from some of the essays is connection that many of these women poets had. So kind of learning about that. And then later on, reading other works by, sort of Pat Parker and Audre Lorde, and thinking about these connections about women and community, and how that's very important, right? It's very important for poetry, very important for queer women, lesbian women to be able to sort of gather like that. And that's influenced me sort of in my current role. I'm a curator of a women's reading series for 13 years now this year. So that's really something that kind of I discovered early on, and I feel that's very empowering to be able to think about that, how we can gather together community. It doesn't have to be huge spaces, right? It can be small, intimate spaces, but to be able to share our truth. And so I think reading about that and learning about the power of these, lesbians, women's voices is something that encouraged me. How can I do that in my own community and bring in particularly, women of color and our allies as well. And so it's been important to be able to do that.
Okay. Do you have a response?
General response, when you talk about the Queen of Swords and memoir, it's hidden in there, but I was in the middle of a deep psychological process of unraveling myself, especially the part of me that thought that I needed to be a good girl. So the goddess is portrayed as a good girl. I did her a disservice, perhaps making her the heroine of this thing, and the underworld is a bar. And the dykes, you know, are warriors who really strip her down. And step by step, she goes through a psychological process that if you know me, you can trace me in there, but if you don't, you won't. So it's a covert way of being autobiographical in the middle of a mythology, and enabled me to deal with difficult subjects, because it was all very painful and difficult, but have something to hang on to, which is the framework of mythology. It's what it does. It lets us project onto, not onto other people for a change, but to project onto the mythology itself, which is to say that the community of story. So there's that. And then for Highest Apple, was that what you were talking about?
Yeah, I was talking about that example.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You know, that is a community. I brought things to talk about memoir in community and memoir as community, and how you work it in. And so in Highest Apple, I was feeling particularly brassy, I think, selecting a bunch of notable women poets, starting with Sappho and including myself. So I included myself sort of in some of them are autobiographical poems, right in there with the other poets that I'm talking about, and created my own fantasy community of history of poets whose work actually talks to each other, and it does. So
Yes.
you know, apples come up, and certain themes come up over and over, and the goddess of love comes up over and over as well, called very different names by the different poets, but there she is. So that is all, you know, pertinent to the idea of how ourselves, our subjective selves, can be part of historic memoir, and how memoir of ourselves can also incorporate a history. And that's something that's of great interest to me, how you combine those things, because I'm always creating community, including the fantasy community of group of poets over time, but also in reality, helping to create real communities of real people who are interacting with each other and with art and with poetry, especially in mythology.
I'm thinking it's on this way. Yeah. Okay. I actually just wanted to, to sort of say that that's the one thing that spoke to me a lot about the Highest Apple, was the poets sort of being in community, their work actually being in community with each other, their writing being in community with each other. I like the idea that you said memoir is community and memoir in community. That's really powerful when we think about it, right? Community as a form of memoir, or vice versa, memoir as a form of community. You know, sharing our stories, right, is so important. And then to be able to sort of write together. I feel like when I was reading your book, it was almost like a poem circle. You know, these poets are coming together, these poems are connecting, and not necessarily on purpose, but I think that they realize by being together, by sharing their work, it's like, wait a minute, we're writing in this circle. There are these very similar themes that we have that we can connect on. And something about that is very powerful, because there's an element, of course, that memoir, that coming out, telling our own stories, but you're doing it with somebody else. And so that you feel empowered.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something about memoirs community. I'm really happy we're talking about this, because as a memoirist, I have such little patience for the idea that memoir is somehow narcissistic, or there's something wrong with it. Why would you want to write a whole book about yourself? And why would you expect other people to care about your life? And I think that fundamentally comes from anxiety about some of the things people share in memoir. People people are scared about hearing real stories of suffering and things that didn't go so well, and trauma, and many up failures, and drugs, and all, I mean, people are scared of this, and they reflect it in a lot of these assumptions about memoirs. So it's important to me to put out that memoir is actually, I find it a very political form, because we're writing our true stories. You know, we are daring to tell the truth, even if the truth is not chic, even if it's not something that, you know, will get us a lot of like, wow, how great you are. Wow, how successful you are. Wow, you're always perfect. Yeah, I mean, I'm just so happy about what you're both saying. Memoir is political. It's a way we talk to each other about the true stuff of life. And it's a lot from memoir that, you know, feminism and queer liberation and other movements have helped get our truth out in the world. You want to say something, Judy?
Sure. That's reminding me that that when I did write a memoir, it's called A Simple Revolution, the making of an activist poet. And I, you know, I had helped found a movement, a couple of them maybe. And I couldn't imagine telling about my life as an individual and leaving that out. So about the first half or more of it really is about my own personal journey. But then once I'm of an age where I've started organizing other people, you know, organizing, you know, organizations, let's say, and projects and so on with the Gay Women's Liberation. And Gay Women's Liberation, we founded that, about 6 of us founded it in 1969. And immediately we moved into households. They were all women's households, and we separated from absolutely everybody. We contested all the theories about anything and just had round the table discussions about who were we, what was wrong with the world, how do we solve it. And each one of the households participated in a particular way in the women's movement as activists. So we helped bring women out of consciousness raising groups in living rooms and out into the world. Founding a bookstore, founding a press. One of the households in Berkeley was a women's center. The lesbians lived upstairs. Another one was a clinic, a gynecological clinic of women taking charge of their own bodies and healing, and working with doctors and performing abortions, and lots of other services, and examining themselves, doing self-exam, they called it. That was during the daytime, and at night they put everything away, and the Kotex boxes became their furniture, and they were a household. So I interviewed a lot of these people as part of my memoir process in the 90s. I interviewed and into the 2000s, and then drew from those interviews to write a whole bunch of stuff about, you know, what a household can accomplish, what a movement household can do. And of course, our movement of households was just one. I mean, all kinds of activists in community in Oakland and San Francisco were in communal houses, coming out of the hippie era, coming out of the Black activist era. People had collective households, which enables working class people to participate. That's what it does. Because if you can keep the rents low enough and share the clothes and food and stuff like that, you can really be class inclusive, which is a very rare thing in this country, really. If you look at the workplaces and how things fall out. Anyway, that was an example then of a memoir that incorporates community right into the memoir as part of the memoir. As part of my life was all of their lives as well. That's great.
Did you want to read something, Judy, from the?
Well, I don't know. I just brought some sample-y things. I didn't know if we were supposed to read or not.
I don't think anybody will object to your reading.
Oh, wait. Okay, so this is the one that was the battered women's shelter. And I'm asking questions beginning. A house is a place where women are, my question is, what are the houses? What is a house supposed to do? A house is a place where women are safe and their labor is valued. About a year after we began meeting as Gay Women's Liberation, a group of women moved into a house on Addison Street in Berkeley. Naomi Rochelle, who was about 19 at the time, recalls that the woman who owned the house allowed them to live there in exchange for turning it into a women's center. Naomi, her bisexual friend, Nancy Chestnut, the writer Jean Malley, and a lesbian couple, Louise Merrill and Brenda Kreider, and their 2 children lived upstairs, while the downstairs served as a center for meetings and somewhat of a battered women's shelter. There were no services. There was nothing. And Louise had spent her life fighting imperialism after being radicalized from a childhood spent in South America. And she was one of the founders of the Workers' World Party and would later help the movement to free May Mallory, a Black woman framed for advocating self-defense against the Klan in North Carolina. So that's one. And by the way, the police finally said to them, please stop beating up the batterers. You keep this up, we're going to arrest you. This is Bernal Heights. What is a house? Safety for children and growing things. Loveliness, division of household chores, hand-stitched designs on tea towels, and a child's drawing taped up on the wall. So this group of women, which included Sandy Boucher, who later wrote 3 books, I think, for Beacon Press about women and Buddhism. But at this time, she was just part of this household, and they were raising kids in common. And they published a women's newspaper called Motherlode. In Oakland, let's see, which one is this? Ideally, in a house, your health needs are looked after. So that was about, the health center that I just talked about. Social change in the world was another one, and Pat Parker had one. Pat Parker was an African-American activist poet whose work has continued to be just extremely important. And she formed a household that included her formation of a group called Gente, which is a Spanish word meaning people, and Gente members had a softball team, and they shared stories about their lives and so on, and they were women of color within a mostly white dyke environment that we had all created. So those are some examples of what's in here and how that works in with, that was just all part of my life. It was just merged with all of this that was happening. Our household did a bookstore and a press.
very inspirational to think about that, right? The
Yes,
communities coming
and-
together like that, yeah.
I actually, I'm just going off the top of my head now,
Mhm.
but I'm wondering if this is something that we need today. Because, most of us, certainly now that we've got the computers and the phones. I mean, that's kind of how we connect, and I feel like. Part of the problem with the whole situation in the country, maybe, is that. People are not connecting on a personal level. And I just am thinking about your group, Women
Yeah.
Poets in Bloom, because I did go to one of your larger meetings.
Right.
Where it was in a library,
Mhm.
the library gave the space, and it was a wonderful meeting. I mean, there were all these poets there that, some people had been invited to read, others, it was like a free open mic.
Yeah.
And there was lovely food, and it was just a great environment, and it was almost exclusively women, right?
Right, it's
So,
open to everyone, but I always tell whatever men show up, as long as you don't mind being, one or two, that's fine.
yeah.
I'm saying that the zero takes it, but basically it's generally, women, a lot of, women of color, a lot of queer women and allies that show up. But yes, to speak to that, I think it is important to have these sort of we're not living together, of course, but every month I host these salons and they're in person. And I usually rent out a community room or community space in the city to do that. Usually, in the past, I've gotten grants from Book and Arts Council that, of course, it helps to get, funding, but a lot of times I spend my own money as well. But it's really just wonderful. The reason I can really sort of feel that effect it has on people is because during the pandemic, we did have to go online. And the great thing about it, of course, is that we ended up getting an international audience, but I missed that connection, right? And so maybe a year or two ago, we finally got back in person and we were literally almost in tears, because every month the people started saying, are you gonna finally go back in person? So I did it slowly, safely, initially, sort of masking things like that. But it was just so empowering to be able to sit together in community, just around a table, to be able to, sort of share your stories, write new poems, things like that. And so that it was such a big, even though the online experience was wonderful and people appreciated it because they were locked in and they were around the country, but coming back, there's nothing that really is the same as being able to meet in person with the community, be able to break bread because usually we have food and wine and drink. So that really is something that it's sort of I would say it nourishes my soul as well. I would say it's a little bit of selfish being a curator because every month I get a chance to sort of choose these poets and writers to come and teach to us, but also to be in community with people who have become, I call it my extended family. I said I'm an only child, the name only. So yes, there's a great value in coming together in person when you can.
Yeah.
Oh, I think.
Do you want to say?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think you're really on to something, Carol and GP. Being in person, I think social media has been the most harmful thing to our political interconnections that there's been. I mean, Twitter itself has been a force for hell in all dimensions, just driving wedges between activists by its very structure. But in person, I live a bit north of the city in Beacon, and being in person with people, being in community with other writers and artists, and and it's possible here in the city as well. I mean, for example, this space, the Bureau, this in-person space where we meet, with our bodies and our minds together. And in Beacon, I run a monthly writers open mic called Lit. And it's all genders, but it's very community. There is no, oh, you're more famous or you're this or there.
Right.
We are the writers and the readers. We're there to listen to each other.
Okay.
Did you want to?
Well, no, I think you've said it, I really think you have, that breaking bread together, there's nothing else like it. I love the online experience because people from all over the place can participate, of course, but the participation is really limited. So classroom visit in person is so much more personal. And people, I take the time for people to say who they are and what they're doing there and so on. And it's much more difficult because of the exhaustion factor in doing Zooms. People get their attention, just can't stay riveted. And people who do Zoom as their work all day long get really wiped out in their minds and bodies over it. And also there's an energetic connection that happens when you're in person that is not replicable. There's a certain amount of energy that can go over the internet, but not the kind of thing that's, person to person in any kind of way. And you can also get, as I just said, you can get to know people a lot more personally because you have more energy for more time with them.
So do you have any advice, any of you, for people who are writing memoirs? Because I'm working on one, so. I'll take advantage here.
I thought you were gonna say, do we have any advice about how to create community?
That's a better question. That's a
Well,
better
let's
question.
do
So-
that one and then get to yours. Because of the hierarchy of money that has happened, where the funds for community are sucked out, to build the rockets to Mars. And people can hardly find venues. And that's true everywhere across the country. It's so expensive to try to own some space and share a space where the rent is off the charts. Just as an example, the rent I paid for my room in my household was $60. Now, this was, 50 years ago, but nevertheless, that wasn't very much money, and it enabled some. And I don't know how, so really overthrowing the economic system comes in number one, how to create community. It's like the internet, so that more funding is going toward community kind of projects of every kind, every dimension you can imagine.
Anybody else?
I mean, definitely. I mean, I agree, there's challenges, especially post-pandemic. I know for me, it's been difficult, to find, spaces. But the salon model started initially in people's homes.
Right.
So, and I love that, so sometimes I still have that option of, there's someone who I'll say, can you, I know Michael Broder, who's here, he's been at one that was in someone's home. You show up, somebody opens their home to us, and it's, we'll find out in advance how many people can they house. And so that can work too, because sometimes we do have these economic constraints. Everybody can't go out and rent a space. I'm fortunate when I do get funding that I can do that. But I also know that I open my own apartment. Not that big, it's a New York apartment. My wife is like, okay, today we're gonna do this. So there are ways that you can, in smaller, communities, create community and open homes to people. If you really, really want that, right? If you really want to bring people in so we can, break bread, as Judy said.
And on that, so in the audience, we have with us, Kelly Dunham, the creator of Queer Memoir. It is usually in public spaces. I've been to it in different public spaces, but I attended a really memorable one in Kelly's apartment many years ago during a subway strike. And that was awesome. So a second, use what we have, use people's houses. And I remember the old days when people did Xeroxing at their office, because that was the way you printed leaflets. Yeah. And also around destroying capitalism. Our current publishing system crushes writers. It really fucking crushes writers. So I want to salute my publisher, also in the audience, Michael Broder from Indolent Books. He's here to be a force, among other things, to get, not crush writers. Let writers come out and not let them be crushed.
And writers of all ages, I know that's something that he's really, he promotes, which I, appreciate that.
So, all right, let's, I kind of want to continue with this, because I think it's important. I mean, I don't know, I just have to say that I get scared a lot. I don't know if anybody else does, but I get really, really scared. And sometimes I think that, the social media is exaggerating or something, but I just, I don't know what to do. I feel that a lot of people are, especially, I shouldn't, maybe younger people. They have like a laundry list of issues. There's like 50 of them. And they go through and they start checking off, and if the candidate they can't check off every single box for that candidate, they won't vote. They'll say, oh, I'm not going to vote, or I'm not going to vote for that candidate or something, whereas, I'll say that when I first, I'm 70 now, when I was eligible to vote for the first time, and I was still living at home, and I didn't, my dad was up at our church on the corner that we voted. And, I was saying, well, I don't really know anything about the candidates. So, I don't think I should go and vote. And my dad said, then you vote your party line, but you vote because that's what we fought for. And, I think part of that has just kind of gone. I think it's, people don't have that mindset anymore. So I don't know what the answer is, but I just, I wish I did, because I'm really, really frightened about the way things are developing in the country. Do you have any thoughts, Judy, or?
It's concerning. It's concerning, and we need to do the very best that we can to keep people together and to help all of us help each other be able to stay in community across differences and to stay civic minded, to keep the democracies such as what we have. I think that's important, and I also think that it's really important to be in community with communities of natural beings who also need our attention and give us their attention when we give them some attention. And they have a positivity that is just amazing. And they go through fear and trauma and being run over in the streets and all of that, but they show up. So squirrels in my neighborhood would bring presents and drop them in the yard for my dog, for example. They were in community and across differences, and it happened too many times to be some kind of coincidence. So that kind of thing I find restores me when I go to those kinds of places. And I don't mean just a walk in the woods, but I mean actual relationships with the creatures and plants that are around us, that they are paying attention to us, whether we are paying attention to them or not. And they have, as I said, they have a joy to be. Is that the right phrase? They have that, and they impart that to us, and we need to impart it, stuff back to them too, to pay some attention to them. And that restores, I don't know what, some kind of confidence in life that the media wants to take away from us, because the media is doing clickbait every second that they're up there. All they care about is that we hit the headline because it's promising some scandal that's in there and something that will frighten us. You'll be so shocked by this, they told me a dozen times a day, that I'm going to be shocked by something that I read, And if I'm foolish enough to open it, I'm depressed afterwards usually, because I fell for a trick, for one thing. So it's about staying connected to reality, to neighbors. Do people drive through some area that you're scared of, but find out that people are actually kind and helpful in reality, on the ground, face to face, no matter what anybody's political flim-flam is in their heads. You know, that's an important also point to keep in mind. What we're.
Absolutely, yeah. I agree with what you're saying, and it also brings it back to community, right? That's really what you're saying. You kind of get to know someone else who you might think is very different, but really you realize you have all these sort of commonalities. And so when we meet in those communities, I think we begin to understand that. Though I hear what you're saying, Carol, about, you know, sort of that fear, you know, you started by saying how you feel that fear. But we can also make sure that we're reaching out and we're coming together with communities that can uplift us. I think that's important because, you know, you can't sort of get carried up in that. But if you have communities that can uplift you, and then you know, continue to educate. I think education is also important. I think about, you know, I have two sons, they're young men now. One's a teen and one is, you know, a grown man. So I just think about that's important as well. Continuing to talk about sort of what's important to try to move away from the negativity or at least deal with it. But let's see, how can we also be hopeful? How can we bring them together with community?
And not, you know, turn aside. I mean, the threats are real.
Absolutely.
They're very real.
That's right.
But then let's go all the way with real and be real.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. With each other.
I actually, I have kind of another question.
Sure.
This is not terrible of me, but kind of relates to this. What I'm noticing in Judy's lap is another of her nonfiction books, Another Mother Tongue, which is fabulous. It's about the presence of queer people of all genders in mythology of various cultures. And one of the things I love about it is that it does deal with all genders in an interesting way, and you talk about the commonality. I wonder if you have thoughts about you know, where we are today, for the last question, where we are today politically, and how creating communities among various genders or all genders may have to do with it.
Well, last night would be a really good example of that. I'm going to call out Gregory Gages here in the audience, who curated what was basically an anthology of performers who were working with my work, for work that's, you know, by this time almost 60 years old. And there were people of all ages and all kinds of genders getting up and doing their art together, you know. And Gregory forms community in a variety of ways, including that he's a master cook. And you know, makes that public as well. But let's see, what was your question?
Around Another Mother Tongue and conceiving of queer communities as multi-gendered and how that relates to what we should do in the present moment.
This is one of the smartest things I ever did. Was to just, you know, take the bit in my mouth and run with it, because we were so independent of everyone else. We became just hopelessly self-confident, all of us, that we could do all kinds of things that if we had been in institutions of any kind, they absolutely would have said no. Do not do that. So I just took off. And with the bookstore, we had the bookstore people who were finding the books and gathering them for us. So as one of our members said, we had our own college, you know, so we had speakers in the bookstore. There was a little bit of space, so you could do a little tiny bit of presentations and so on. And people would bring me books. They started bringing me stories. They started bringing me all kinds of things. Just because I was the poet and the poetry was really guiding our movement, which I I knew at the time, then I forgot it.
Right.
Then later, people started saying, yes, that was really true. We would gather to hear the poets and then we would end up talking to each other for hours
Yeah.
afterwards.
Absolutely.
And so people brought me all kinds of things and I wrote this, well, I used to call it a warm, wet history. And making use eclectically, just from any source whatsoever that I could find that might be credible, was credible, certainly should have been credible. And putting it together as a kind of showing that there was LGBTQI, etc. history throughout history and throughout the world, and that there was so much of it, there was no doubt that it existed, that it still exists,
Mhm.
that the whole idea that it all started with, you know, three Western people somewhere was nonsense, and that we're just completely integrated as a part of human culture. It's just that some cultures repress it. What am I not saying? Religion is what I'm not saying. The hidden word. So anyway, another mother tongue, gay words, gay worlds, and I called everybody gay. I'm so grateful that the contemporary people who have parsed it all out in terms that I've had to learn, non-binary and trans woman, trans man, and many more that I haven't yet learned, I'm sure.
Still learning, always learning.
Always learning that they so many of them don't take offense that I called everything gay. Because now they call everything trans, and so we're even. But another thing I wanted to say about this is that this is an example of a history that in which I incorporated some memoir into it. And in the form of letters to my first lover, who had died, I believe, of despair, of not being able to put together a lesbian life that would allow her to live. She was a teacher by occupation. She loved that. She wasn't going to give it up. And she was always faced with the choice. Do you give it up? Do you not give it up? You know, and her form of rebellion was to buy a little house in New Mexico and refuse to put any furniture in it. That was, you know, not a stitch, nothing, not even a kitchen chair. You went to her house, there was nothing. You know, you sat on the floor with your back against the wall and talked to her because that was how she could rebel. Her family would come to visit, she would be really pleasant to them, but that was no. And wasn't she acting out that she had no place to sit, you know, no place at the table, that in fact there was no table for her. Yeah, I'm just thinking that right now. Anyway, every chapter opens with, you know, dear Vaughn, you would be amazed if you knew this, you know, and if only, and do you remember, because she taught me the words gay, butch, you know, a few other words. And many of them just really pejorative, and I came to understand that you could take any word, you could take the word sweet roll, and if you were beating someone while you said it, it would become a negative word, right? So I found so much history in these words, priceless history that connects to the sacred again and again with words like faggot and butch and bulldagger and, you know, these forbidden words. But anyway, my point was that I forget what my point was.
Well, are we,
Yes, I forgot to give you the file.
oh, Well, I guess we're wrapping up then.
Yeah.
This is, well, I'm just really grateful to have been a part of this, and I really want to thank Judy and JP and Donna for, sharing this and your thoughts with us, and I think it's been really wonderful. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm sure you know of many other events going on today that you want to go to, but we'll be hosting a few events later today. 2:30, we're hosting Augustus Durham, who's going to be presenting his book, Stay Black and Die, on Genius and Melancholy. At 4 o'clock, we're going to have a reading by Samra Habib from We Were Always Here, We Have Always Been Here, a queer Muslim memoir. And then at 5, we have Andrea Lawler hanging out in the back there. And then we rest. Yeah. Absolutely.
If you would leave the chair.
Oh, yeah, okay, great.
Good night. Good night. Goodbye, online.